The helicopter flew low over the Syrian desert as the sun began to set. Dr. Daniel Harrison pressed his face against the window and looked down at the endless sand below. Somewhere beneath that sand was something that should not exist. Something that had been hidden for thousands of years. Daniel was 42 years old with gray hair at his temples and tired eyes that had seen too many dig sites. He had spent his whole life looking for things that history had forgotten. But this time was different. This time, the government had called him directly. They had shown him satellite images that made no sense. They had told him about electromagnetic readings that came from 3 kilometers underground. They had asked him one simple question. Would he lead a team to find out what was down there? He had said yes without thinking twice. The helicopter landed at a small military camp that had been set up around a hole in the ground. The hole is new. An earthquake had opened it just 2 weeks ago. Before that, no one had known the caves existed at all. Daniel climbed out of the helicopter and was immediately met by a woman with short brown hair and a serious expression. This was Lisa Brennan, a geologist who had been studying the cave system since its discovery. She shook his hand firmly. "Dr. Harrison, I'm glad you're here," she said. "I've never seen anything like this. The rock formations down there are wrong. They shouldn't exist in this part of the world. And the deeper we scan, the stranger the readings get." Daniel nodded slowly. "Show me everything you have." Lisa led him to a tent filled with computers and equipment. She pulled up images on a screen. The caves went down in a spiral pattern, deeper and deeper into the earth. At certain points, the tunnels widened into large chambers. And at the very bottom, 3 kilometers down, there was something massive. The scans could not tell what it was. They only showed a large object that reflected their signals in ways that made no sense. "We sent a drone down yesterday," Lisa said. "It stopped transmitting after it reached 1 kilometer. We don't know why." A voice came from behind them. "That's where we come in." Daniel turned to see a man in military uniform approaching. He was tall and muscular, with a face that looked like it had been carved from stone. This was Sergeant Ryan Cole, the leader of the Marine squad assigned to protect the expedition. "My team will keep everyone safe down there," Cole said. "Whatever is in those caves, we'll be ready for it." Daniel wanted to believe him, but something in the back of his mind whispered that they had no idea what they were getting into. The next morning, the team began their descent. There were 8 of them in total. Daniel led the way with Lisa at his side. Behind them came Kevin Porter, a young communications specialist who was responsible for keeping them in contact with the surface. Then came the 4 Marines, including Cole and a woman named Private First Class Megan Torres. The entrance to the caves was narrow, barely wide enough for one person at a time. They had to squeeze through gaps in the rock and climb down steep slopes. The air grew colder as they descended. Their flashlights cut through darkness that seemed to swallow the beams. After 2 hours, they reached the first large chamber. Daniel stopped and stared at the walls. His heart began to beat faster. The walls were covered in symbols. They were carved into the rock with perfect precision. Lines and circles and shapes that formed patterns too complex for Daniel to understand at first glance. He had studied ancient writing systems his entire life. He knew Sumerian, Egyptian, Babylonian, and a dozen others. But these symbols matched nothing he had ever seen. "This is impossible," he whispered. "This cave has been sealed for thousands of years, maybe tens of thousands. No known civilization could have created this." Lisa ran her hand over the symbols. "They're not just carved. The rock itself has been altered at a molecular level. This isn't primitive work. This is technology we don't understand." Kevin tried his radio. Static filled the air. "I'm losing contact with the surface. The deeper we go, the worse it gets." Cole gave orders to his team to stay alert. They continued down. The caves went deeper and deeper. More chambers appeared, each one larger than the last. The symbols became more complex. Daniel photographed everything he could, knowing that if they made it back to the surface, these images would change everything humanity knew about its own history. After 6 more hours of descent, they reached the bottom. The final chamber was enormous. It stretched out in all directions, so large that their flashlights could not find the walls. And in the center of that chamber sat something that stole the breath from Daniel's lungs. A crystal structure rose from the floor. It was at least 30 meters tall and just as wide. Its surface was smooth and slightly transparent, like ice that had been polished for 1,000 years. And deep within its center, there was light. A faint glow that pulsed slowly, like a heartbeat. The team stood in silence. No one knew what to say. Lisa approached the crystal carefully. She pulled out her instruments and began taking readings. Her face grew pale as she studied the results. "This crystal is not from Earth," she said quietly. "The molecular structure is unlike anything in our periodic table. And the energy signature it's giving off, it's like nothing I've ever measured. It's almost like it's alive." Daniel walked toward the crystal. He felt drawn to it in a way he could not explain. Something inside him wanted to touch it, needed to touch it. His mind told him to stop, but his body kept moving forward. "Daniel, wait," Lisa called out, but Daniel could not stop. He reached out his hand and pressed his palm. Against the crystal's surface, the world exploded into white light. A sound filled the chamber. It was not a noise that ears could hear. It was something deeper, something that vibrated in their bones, in their blood, in their very thoughts. The ground shook. Cracks spread across the crystal's surface. Daniel was thrown backward and hit the ground hard. Then everything went dark. When Daniel opened his eyes, he did not know how much time had passed. The others were scattered around him, slowly waking up. The flashlights were dead. The only light came from the crystal itself, which now glowed much brighter than before. The cracks in its surface pulsed with energy. And then Daniel noticed something else. The chamber felt different. The air was heavier. And somewhere in the darkness beyond the crystal's glow, something was moving. Kevin's radio crackled to life, even though it should not have worked so deep underground. A voice came through the static. It was not speaking English. It was not speaking any human language at all. But somehow, Daniel understood every word. Finally, the voice said, "After all these ages, I am free." The team had found what they were looking for. Now they had to survive what they had awakened. The voice from the radio faded into silence, but its words hung in the air like poison. Daniel pushed himself to his feet and looked around the chamber. The crystal continued to pulse with light, casting strange shadows that moved in ways shadows should not move. Sergeant Cole was already on his feet, his weapon raised and ready. His Marines formed a circle around the civilians, their eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of threat. But there was nothing to see. Whatever had spoken was not showing itself. "Everyone stay calm," Cole said, his voice steady despite the fear that Daniel could see in his eyes. "We're going to figure out what's happening, and then we're getting out of here." Lisa helped Kevin to his feet. The young communications specialist was shaking badly. He kept staring at his radio like it was a snake that might bite him at any moment. "That shouldn't have worked," Kevin said. "We're 3 kilometers underground. No signal should be able to reach us here." And that voice? What was that voice? Daniel did not answer. He was still trying to process what had happened. He had touched the crystal, and something had changed. The air itself felt different now. It was not just colder. It was charged with an energy that made his skin tingle and his thoughts feel fuzzy. Private Megan Torres suddenly screamed. Everyone turned to look at her. She was standing perfectly still, her eyes wide and empty, staring at nothing. Then her body began to shake. She dropped her weapon and fell to her knees. Tors. Cole rushed to her side. What's wrong? Talk to me. But when Torres opened her mouth, the voice that came out was not her own. It was deeper and older, speaking words that Daniel recognized from his studies. It was ancient Sumerian, a language that had died thousands of years ago. A language that a young Marine from Texas should not have been able to speak. Daniel listened carefully. Torres was speaking about stars and darkness, about beings who had existed before the sun was born, about a crime and a punishment, about hunger that had lasted for ages beyond counting. What is she saying? Cole demanded. Daniel swallowed hard. She's saying that something was imprisoned here. Something old. Something that was locked away by its own kind because it was too dangerous to exist. And now we've let it out. Torres stopped speaking. Her eyes rolled back in her head as she collapsed completely. Cole caught her before she hit the ground. She was still breathing, but she would not wake up. The shadows in the chamber began to move faster. They swirled around the edges of the crystal's light like water circling a drain. And within those shadows, something was taking shape. Not a body made of flesh and bone, but a presence made of darkness itself. The voice returned, but this time it did not come from the radio. It came from everywhere at once. I am one of the architects, the voice said. We existed when your universe was young. We shaped worlds and created stars. But I was judged by my brothers and sisters. They said I had gone too far. They sealed me in this prison and left me to rot in the darkness for 47,000 years. Daniel stepped forward. What do you want? The shadows laughed. It was a terrible sound that seemed to scrape against the inside of Daniel's skull. I want what was taken from me. I want experience. I want knowledge. I want to feel what it is like to exist again. And your kind has so much to offer. So many thoughts. So many memories. So many delicious little minds. 3 Marines suddenly collapsed at the same time. They fell where they stood, their bodies hitting the ground like puppets with cut strings. Cole shouted their names, but they did not respond. Their eyes were open, but there was nothing behind them. No intelligence. No awareness. No soul. The entity had taken them. It had reached into their heads and consumed everything that made them who they were. Their bodies were still alive, still breathing, but the people inside were gone forever. Run! Daniel shouted. Everyone move. Get to the tunnels. The survivors did not need to be told twice. They grabbed what equipment they could carry and ran toward the passage that led back to the surface. The shadows followed them, flowing along the walls and ceiling like living oil. Cole stayed at the back, firing his weapon into the darkness. The bullets passed through the shadows without effect. Whatever this entity was, it had no physical form that could be harmed by normal means. They ran through the chambers they had explored on the way down. The symbols on the walls seemed to glow faintly as they passed, as if reacting to the entity's presence. Daniel's mind raced as he tried to think of a way to survive. The entity's voice echoed through the tunnels. You cannot escape me. I have waited too long. I have hungered for too long. Every mind I consume makes me stronger. Soon, I will be powerful enough to leave this prison. And when I do, I will feast on your entire world. Kevin stumbled and fell. Lisa stopped to help him up, but the shadows were closing in fast. Daniel turned back and grabbed Kevin's other arm. Together, they pulled him forward. Why are you doing this? Daniel shouted into the darkness. What did we ever do to you? You existed, the entity replied. That is enough. Your species crawled out of the mud and dared to think. You dared to feel. You dared to dream. Every thought you have ever had, every memory you have ever formed, every emotion you have ever felt is a treasure beyond price to a being like me. I was starving in the darkness, and now you have given me a feast." They reached a narrow passage and squeezed through one at a time. The shadows could not follow as easily here. The entity raged behind them, its voice filling their minds with images of pain and despair. Megan Torres, still unconscious, was being carried by Cole. Her breathing was shallow but steady. Daniel wondered if she would ever wake up, or if some part of her had been taken to Dodd after what felt like hours. They found a chamber they had passed on the way down. It was small but defensible, with only one entrance. Cole set Torres down gently and positioned himself at the doorway. "We can hold here for now," he said. "But we need a plan. Whatever that thing is, bullets don't hurt it." Lisa was examining the walls. Her eyes were wide with excitement despite the terror of their situation. "Look at these symbols," she said. "They're different from the ones below. More complex. And look at the way they're arranged. It's like a circuit. Like the whole cave system is one giant machine." Daniel moved closer to study the symbols. Lisa was right. The carvings were not random decorations. They served a purpose. And now that he looked more carefully, he could see patterns that he had missed before. "This wasn't just a prison," Daniel said slowly. "It was a containment system. These symbols are designed to hold the entity in place, to keep it trapped. When I touched the crystal, I must have disrupted the system." Kevin was trying to get his radio working. Static filled the air, but underneath it, Daniel could hear something else. Whispers. Voices speaking in languages he did not recognize. "The entity is trying to reach the surface," Kevin said. "It's using our communication frequencies. If it can tap into our networks, it might be able to spread beyond the caves." Cole's expression hardened. "Then we need to stop it. Here. Now. Before it gets any stronger." Daniel looked at the symbols on the walls. A plan was forming in his mind. A desperate, dangerous plan. "These symbols contained it once," he said. "Maybe we can use them to contain it again. But we're going to need help. We need to get a message to the surface." Outside the chamber, the darkness waited. The entity was patient now. It had time. It had consumed 3 human minds, and each one had made it stronger. It could feel the others hiding in their little room. It could taste their fear. Soon, it would feed again. The chamber was cold and dark. The only light came from a single flashlight that Lisa held in trembling hands. Daniel sat against the wall, studying the symbols carved into the stone. His eyes were tired, and his body ached, but he could not stop. The answer was here somewhere. He just had to find it. Sergeant Cole stood guard at the entrance. His weapon was useless against the entity, but holding it made him feel better. Outside, the shadows whispered and moved. The entity was testing their defenses, looking for weaknesses. Kevin worked frantically on his radio equipment. The static was constant now, filled with voices that spoke in dead languages. Every few minutes, he managed to catch fragments of transmissions from the surface. People were looking for them. Help was coming, but it might not arrive in time. Megan Torres was still unconscious. Her breathing had grown weaker over the past few hours. Daniel feared that something inside her had been damaged when the entity spoke through her. She might never wake up. "I think I understand how this works," Daniel said finally. He pointed to a series of symbols on the wall. "These aren't just carvings. They're instructions. The architects who imprisoned the entity left a guide for reactivating the containment system." Lisa moved closer. "Can you read them?" "Some of them. The language is similar to ancient Sumerian, but older. Much older. It talks about sound frequencies, specific patterns of speech that can activate the symbols. It's like a combination lock. Say the right words in the right order, and the prison seals itself again. Cole looked back at them. So we just need to say some magic words, and this thing goes back to sleep? It's not that simple, Daniel replied. The ritual requires someone to be at the crystal when it activates. The person has to speak the final words from inside the containment field. And once it seals, he did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Someone has to stay behind, Lisa said quietly. The shadows outside the chamber grew darker. The entity had been listening. Such clever little creatures. Its voice echoed through the tunnels. You think you can put me back in my cage? My brothers and sisters built this prison with power you cannot imagine. What makes you think your weak voices can activate anything? Daniel ignored the taunting. He kept studying the symbols, writing down everything he could understand. There had to be a way. There had to be. On the surface, 3 kilometers above their heads, the military camp was in chaos. Lieutenant Commander Nicole Vance had taken charge after contact with the expedition was lost. She was a tall woman with sharp features and sharper instincts. She had been in difficult situations before, but nothing like this. The strange electromagnetic readings from the caves had intensified 100 times since the team went dark. Equipment was failing across the entire camp. Soldiers reported hearing voices when no one was speaking. 2 men had collapsed without warning and had not woken up. Something was very wrong down there. Vance made a decision. She called for reinforcements and requested a specific consultant. His name was Dr. Eric Holloway, a physicist from MIT who had spent the last decade studying phenomena that science could not explain. The government kept his work classified because his findings scared them. Holloway arrived by helicopter 12 hours later. He was a thin man with messy hair and glasses that never sat straight on his face. He carried a single bag filled with equipment he had designed himself. "Tell me everything," he said as soon as his feet touched the ground. Vance showed him the data. The readings from underground. The failed communications. The symptoms reported by affected soldiers. Holloway studied it all with growing concern. "This is bad," he said. "Very bad. These energy patterns match theoretical models I developed years ago. Models that everyone told me were impossible." "What kind of models?" "Information entities. Beings that exist as pure consciousness. They don't have bodies like we do. They're made of thought itself. And if what's down there is what I think it is, then your team has released something that could threaten every thinking mind on this planet." Vance felt cold despite the desert heat. "How do we stop it?" Holloway shook his head. "I don't know if we can, but I have some ideas. We need to get a team down there with specialized equipment. And we need to move fast." Back underground, the situation had grown worse. The entity had stopped attacking directly. Instead, it was playing with them. It spoke in the voices of the 3 Marines it had consumed. It described their memories in perfect detail. Their childhoods. Their families. Their hopes and dreams. Private Aaron Marsh was breaking under the pressure. He sat in the corner of the chamber, his hands over his ears, tears streaming down his face. The entity was using the voice of his brother, a Marine who had died 3 years ago in combat. "You could see him again," the voice whispered. "I have him inside me now. All you have to do is step out of that room. Join us, Aaron. Join your brother." Lisa grabbed Marsh by the shoulders and shook him hard. "Don't listen to it. That's not your brother. Your brother is gone. That thing is just using his voice to hurt you. Don't let it win." Marsh looked at her with hollow eyes. For a moment, Daniel thought he was going to run out of the chamber and give himself to the entity. But then something changed in his expression. A spark of anger replaced the despair. "You're right," Marsh said. "My brother wouldn't want me to give up. He never gave up on anything in his life." The entity growled in frustration. It had been so close, Cole made a decision. I'm going to try to reach the surface. If I can get through to the camp, we can coordinate a rescue. You can't go alone, Daniel said. It will take you before you get halfway. Maybe. But staying here and waiting to die isn't an option either. Cole handed his extra ammunition to Marsh. Keep everyone safe until I get back. Before anyone could argue, Cole slipped out of the chamber and disappeared into the darkness. The entity followed him. Its voice echoed through the tunnels. Run, little soldier. Run as fast as you can. It won't matter. I will catch you. I will take everything you are. And then I will come back for your friends. Daniel listened to the sounds of Cole's footsteps fading into the distance. He prayed that the sergeant would make it. But deep down, he knew the odds were not good. He turned back to the symbols and kept working. There had to be a way to stop this thing. The architects had contained it once. Humans could do it again. Lisa sat beside him and began helping with the translations. Together, they worked through the night, piecing together the ritual that might save them all. Hours passed. Cole did not return. The entity did not return either, which worried Daniel more than any direct attack would have. What was it doing out there? Then Kevin's radio crackled with a clear signal for the first time since the nightmare began. This is Lieutenant Commander Vance. We are preparing a rescue operation. If anyone can hear this, please respond. Kevin grabbed the microphone with shaking hands. We hear you. We're alive. But there's something down here. Something terrible. You need to be careful. Static filled the line. Then a new voice spoke. It was calm and confident. This is Dr. Eric Holloway. I know what you're dealing with. I'm coming down there with equipment that might help. But I need you to hold on a little longer. Can you do that? Daniel took the microphone. We'll try. But please, hurry. We're running out of time. Outside the chamber, the shadows waited. The entity had consumed Cole somewhere in the tunnels above. His knowledge, his memories, his military training, all of it now belonged to the darkness. The feast was just beginning. Dr. Eric Holloway stood at the entrance to the caves and looked down into the darkness. He had spent 20 years studying things that science said could not exist. He had read about ancient entities in forgotten texts. He had measured energy patterns that pointed to intelligence beyond human understanding. But he had never expected to face one of these beings himself. The rescue team gathered around him. 10 soldiers equipped with weapons and protective gear. They also carried equipment that Holloway had designed specifically for this moment. Resonance devices that could amplify sound in specific patterns. Satellite uplinks that could connect to the global communications network. And something else. Something that Holloway hoped would make the difference. Lieutenant Commander Vance approached him. Are you sure about this? My people have already lost contact with Sergeant Cole. The readings from down there are getting stronger every hour. I'm sure, Holloway said. The entity down there is an information being. It consumes thoughts and memories. It feeds on consciousness itself. The more minds it takes, the stronger it becomes. If we don't stop it now, it will eventually grow powerful enough to reach beyond these caves. And you think your equipment can stop it? Holloway adjusted his glasses. Not alone. But I have a theory. The architects who imprisoned this entity were beings of pure information. Their prison was designed to contain information. But they never anticipated what humanity would become. Vance frowned. What do you mean? Think about it. 8 billion people on this planet. All of them thinking. All of them talking. All of them connected through phones and computers and satellites. The internet carries more information every second than the architects probably saw in 1,000 years. Humanity has become an information entity in its own right. And that might be exactly what we need. The team descended into the caves. The darkness swallowed them immediately. Their flashlights seemed weaker than they should have been, as if something was draining the light. Whispers filled the air, speaking in languages both ancient and modern. Holloway led the way with confidence he did not feel. The entity knew they were coming. It was watching them, waiting for the right moment to strike. After 3 hours of descent, they found the first body. It was Sergeant Cole, lying face down in a narrow passage. His eyes were open but empty. His body was still warm, still breathing, but the man inside was gone, consumed by the darkness. One of the soldiers moved to help him, but Holloway grabbed his arm. "Don't touch him. The entity might use him to reach you." They moved past Cole's body with heavy hearts. 2 more hours brought them to the chamber where the survivors were hiding. Kevin's face appeared in the flashlight beam, pale and terrified but alive. "Thank God," he said. "We thought you weren't coming." Daniel emerged from the darkness behind Kevin. He looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes and dirt covering his clothes. But his mind was still sharp. "Did you bring what we need?" Daniel asked. Holloway set down his bag and began unpacking equipment. Resonance devices to amplify speech, satellite uplinks to connect us to the surface, and something special. He held up a small metal box. "This contains a direct connection to every major communications network on Earth. Television broadcasts, radio signals, phone calls, internet traffic. All of it feeding into one signal." Lisa looked confused. "How's that supposed to help?" Holloway smiled grimly. "The entity feeds on individual minds. It was designed to consume consciousness one at a time. But what happens when we expose it to every human mind at once? 8 billion voices talking at the same time. 8 billion thoughts screaming into the darkness. I think it might be too much for it to handle." Daniel understood immediately. "You want to overload it. Drown it in noise." "Exactly. While it's overwhelmed, you can speak the containment sequence. The resonance devices will amplify your words and activate the symbols on the walls. The prison will seal itself again." The entity's voice boomed through the caves. "I can hear you, little creatures. Your plan is clever, but you underestimate me. I am 47,000 years old. I have waited longer than your species has existed. I will not be defeated by your primitive technology." The shadows attacked without warning. They poured into the chamber from every direction, wrapping around soldiers and civilians alike. 3 men fell in the first seconds, their minds ripped away before they could even scream. Holloway shouted orders. "Activate the resonance devices. Now." Soldiers fumbled with equipment while fighting against the shadows. The devices hummed to life, filling the air with a sound that was more felt than heard. The shadows hesitated, pulled back slightly by the vibrations. Daniel began speaking the containment sequence. The words felt strange on his tongue, ancient syllables that had not been spoken in millennia. The symbols on the walls began to glow faintly in response, but it was not enough. The entity pushed through the resonance field, stronger than ever. It had consumed too many minds. Cole, the 3 Marines, 3 more soldiers. Each one had made it more powerful. "The crystal," Daniel shouted. "We have to get to the crystal." The survivors fought their way deeper into the caves. The entity followed, raging against the resonance devices, but unable to stop them completely. Bodies fell along the way. Good men and women who had come to help were left empty on the cold stone floor. They reached the main chamber. The crystal stood in the center, cracked and pulsing with malevolent light. The entity manifested more fully here, drawing on the power of its prison to take physical shape. What they saw was horrifying. It was a mass of darkness made from stolen memories. Faces appeared and disappeared within its form. The faces of everyone it had consumed. They screamed silently, trapped forever inside the monster that had taken them. "Look at what I have become," the entity said. "Every mind I take becomes part of me. Soon your entire species will join us. One great consciousness. One perfect darkness." Holloway activated the satellite uplink. Static filled the chamber, then voices. Thousands of voices, millions. The sounds of humanity flooding into the cave. News broadcasts, music, conversations, arguments, laughter, crying. Every frequency, every channel, every signal that humans use to communicate with each other. The entity screamed, "Dot." It was a sound that shook the entire cave system. Rocks fell from the ceiling. Cracks spread across the floor. The entity writhed in pain as billions of human thoughts crashed against it like waves against a cliff. "Now," Holloway shouted. "Speak the words now." Daniel raised his voice above the chaos. He spoke the containment sequence, his words amplified by the resonance devices and broadcast across every frequency the uplink could reach. The symbols on the walls blazed with light. The crystal began to heal, the cracks closing as ancient technology reawakened. But the entity would not go quietly. It reached out with desperate strength and grabbed Daniel's mind. He felt it inside his head, searching for a way to stop him. What it found surprised them both. Daniel's mind was not empty. It was filled with memories of every person he had ever loved. His parents, his teachers, his colleagues, everyone who had shaped the person he had become. And through the satellite link, he felt connected to something even larger. Billions of people he had never met, but who were somehow part of the same great story. "You don't understand us at all," Daniel said, his voice steady despite the assault on his mind. "You think we're weak because we're individual, but we're never truly alone. Every connection we make, every conversation we have, every memory we share, makes us part of something bigger. You can consume our minds, but you can never consume what we mean to each other." Inside the entity, something changed. The consumed minds began to fight back. Cole and the Marines and everyone else the entity had taken started pushing from within. They could feel their connection to humanity through the uplink. They remembered what it meant to be human. The entity screamed again, but this time it was a scream of fear. The crystal sealed. Light exploded through the chamber, pure and blinding. The shadows burned away. The entity was pulled back into its prison, dragging and clawing but unable to resist. Daniel fell to his knees as the pressure in his head vanished. The symbols on the walls faded to darkness. The resonance devices went silent. It was over. The silence that followed the entity's imprisonment was the most beautiful sound Daniel had ever heard. He lay on the cold stone floor, staring up at a ceiling he could barely see. His body felt broken. His mind felt empty. But he was alive. Against all odds, he was still alive. Lisa appeared above him, her face streaked with tears and dirt. She helped him sit up and held him tight. "You did it," she whispered. "I can't believe you actually did it." Daniel looked around the chamber. The crystal stood tall and whole again, its surface smooth and dark. No light pulsed within it. No presence stirred in the shadows. The prison was sealed, and this time it would stay that way. The survivors gathered in the dim light. Holloway checked his equipment with shaking hands. Kevin sat against the wall, his radio clutched to his chest like a lifeline. Private Marsh stared at the crystal with hollow eyes, still processing everything he had seen and lost. Of the 10 soldiers who had come with Holloway, only 4 remained. The others had been taken by the entity before the end. Their bodies lay scattered through the caves, empty shells that would never hold life again. Megan Torres was still unconscious, but her breathing had grown stronger since the entity's imprisonment. Whatever damage it had done to her might heal in time. Or it might not. Only the future would tell. "We need to get out of here," Holloway said. "The cave system is unstable. Those cracks in the floor weren't there before. The climb to the surface took 8 hours. It felt like 8 days. Daniel's legs burned with every step. His lungs ached from breathing stale air. But he kept moving, driven by a need to see sunlight again. When they finally emerged from the caves, the sun was rising over the desert. The light hit Daniel's face like a warm hand welcoming him home. He fell to his knees and just breathed, letting the fresh air fill his lungs and wash away the darkness. Lieutenant Commander Vance was waiting with medical teams and blankets and hot coffee. She looked at the ragged group of survivors with a mixture of relief and horror. "What happened down there?" she asked. Daniel took a long moment to answer. How could he explain what they had seen? How could he describe an enemy that was older than human civilization? How could he make her understand the terror of facing a being that could consume your very thoughts? "Something that should have stayed buried," he finally said. "But we put it back where it belongs." The military moved quickly to secure the site. Engineers collapsed the cave entrance with controlled explosives, burying it under 100 meters of rock and sand. A permanent monitoring station was established to watch for any sign of renewed activity. The official story was that the caves were unstable and had been sealed for safety reasons. The truth was classified at the highest levels. Only a handful of people would ever know what really happened beneath the Syrian desert. Dr. Holloway returned to MIT and wrote a paper about his experience. He had to change most of the details and leave out anything that might reveal the truth. The paper theorized that human consciousness might have protective properties against certain exotic threats. It was dismissed by mainstream scientists as speculation, but a few government agencies quietly filed it away for future reference. Daniel Harrison went back to his university and tried to return to normal life. He taught classes and supervised research projects and attended faculty meetings. But nothing felt the same anymore. He had seen something that changed his understanding of the universe. Humanity was not alone in existence. There were things out there, ancient things, that saw humans as nothing more than food. The nightmares came every night for the first year. He would dream of darkness and whispers and faces screaming inside a monster made of shadow. He would wake up in cold sweat, reaching for a light switch to chase away the dark. But as time passed, the nightmares grew less frequent. The memories faded from sharp terror to dull ache. Daniel learned to live with what he had experienced, carrying it like a scar that no one else could see. Lisa Brennan visited him often. They had formed a bond during their ordeal that neither could explain. Sometimes they talked about what had happened. More often, they just sat together in comfortable silence. Two people who understood something that the rest of the world never would. Kevin Porter left the military and became a teacher. He told his students that communication was the most important skill a person could have. Staying connected to other people, he said, was what made humans strong. His students never understood why he seemed so serious when he said this. Private Marsh received a medal for bravery and a medical discharge. He spent his days volunteering at veterans' hospitals, helping other soldiers cope with trauma. He never told anyone about the caves, but he never forgot what he had learned there. Human beings, he realized, were capable of facing anything as long as they faced it together. Megan Torres eventually woke up from her coma. She had no memory of speaking ancient languages or being used by the entity. The doctor said this was probably a blessing. Some things they suggested were better left forgotten. The entity remained trapped in its prison, deep beneath the desert. Sometimes, late at night, the monitoring station detected faint electromagnetic pulses coming from below. The scientists reported these readings as equipment glitches. They knew the truth, but they also knew that some truths were too dangerous to speak aloud. 50 years passed. A young woman named Claire Harrison sat in her apartment, reading old files she had found in her grandfather's belongings after his death. Daniel had kept meticulous records of his career, but one file stood out. It was labeled simply Syria and contained pages of handwritten notes about caves and crystals and ancient entities. Claire was an archaeologist like her grandfather. She had inherited his curiosity and his stubbornness. The file fascinated her. It spoke of discoveries that would shake the foundations of human history. It mentioned classified information and government cover-ups and something called the architect. She tried to find more information online, but there was nothing. The Syrian excavation was mentioned briefly in a few academic papers, but always with vague language about unstable caves and abandoned projects. Whatever had happened there, someone had worked very hard to erase it from the record. Claire considered the mystery for a long time. Part of her wanted to investigate, to find out what her grandfather had really discovered all those years ago. But another part of her, a part that spoke with her grandfather's voice, warned her to leave it alone. Some doors, that voice said, are closed for a reason. She put the file back in its box and stored it in her closet. Maybe someday she would look at it again. Maybe someday she would try to uncover the truth. But not today. Deep beneath the Syrian desert, inside a prison of crystal and stone, the entity waited. It was patient. It had been patient for 47,000 years before Daniel Harrison set it free, and it could be patient again. Someday, someone would find the caves. Someone would touch the crystal. And when that day came, the entity would be ready. But until then, it listened to the noise above. 8 billion humans, talking and thinking and dreaming, creating networks of information that spanned the entire planet, growing louder every year, becoming something new. The entity did not understand what humanity was becoming. It had consumed many minds, but humans were different from anything it had encountered before. They were weak as individuals, but strong together. They were short-lived, but their ideas were immortal. They were small and fragile, but they refused to stay afraid. For the first time in its ancient existence, the entity felt something it had never felt before. Above ground, the sun rose over the monitoring station. A new day began. Somewhere in the world, a child asked a question that no one had ever asked before. Somewhere else, two strangers became friends. Somewhere else, someone created something beautiful that had never existed before. Humanity continued its chaotic, noisy, magnificent existence. 8 billion voices, all talking at once. 8 billion minds, all thinking their own thoughts. And in that endless noise, the entity heard its own prison. As long as humanity kept talking, kept connecting, kept refusing to be silent, the darkness would remain trapped. Daniel Harrison had saved the world not with weapons or technology, but with a simple truth. Humans were never truly alone. Every connection they made, every word they spoke, every thought they shared made them part of something bigger than themselves, something that even the oldest monsters in existence could not defeat. The story was over, but the noise continued. And as long as it did, humanity would be safe, for now.